Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the first in a series of presentations individually and via panel on helping those who help others. My name is Garrett Lloyd Lester. I'm the Director of Community and Coalition Initiatives at the Suicide Prevention Center of New York. And before we get started, I just want to provide a little bit of background, a little bit of context of why this presentation and some of the work that's being done around this particular topic. So as part of the 2020 State of the State, Governor Cuomo directed the Office of Mental Health to increase efforts to combat suicide within the populations of police and corrections, fire, EMS, veterans, and military. And he further charged OMH with convening a panel of stakeholders and experts at our annual suicide prevention conference, typically held in September, and to have this panel of experts develop and implement strategies for preventing suicide amongst these populations. Well, fast forward to March, and of course the pandemic hit, and our conference, of course, has gotten canceled for this year. However, New York State remains committed to continuing to do work in this space. And so we began convening a panel of content area experts from upstate and downstate, paid and volunteer, and developed a steering committee which had its first meeting in late September. We've met 3 times since then, and the first meeting participants had the opportunity to introduce themselves and why it's important to be a part of this work, along with representatives from fire and police and EMS, corrections, veterans in the military. We also have state-level partners from OMH, from OASIS, Office of Victim Services, Department of Veteran Services, and others. So it's really been a wonderful collaboration and coordination of individuals at this point, all of whom are interested and passionate about this topic. As individuals had the opportunity to introduce themselves at the first meeting, not surprisingly, a common theme of why it was important to be part of this work included individuals having been personally and professionally impacted by the topic of suicide. And so that's really been very compelling as we've had folks participate in the steering committee to date. The steering committee has begun to refine a list of topics and potential presenters to coordinate over the next few months. These presentations, virtual in nature, are going to take the place of the breakout sessions that we would have otherwise had at the conference this year. The hope is that the information gained from the variety of topics will help the committee be able to craft a series of recommendations and strategies that departments from across the state, as well as community partners, can consider for adoption and integration. Some of the topics that have come up so far include peer-to-peer examples, wellness and resilience training and programs, family and collateral involvement, community support, post-vention, and others. So while this is the first, it is certainly not the last, and we anticipate, again, having a series of similar presentations over the next few months and beyond, most likely into 2021. Early on, the committee recognized that there are many similarities between these professions, these public safety servants, but that these professions are not a monolith, and so that there are certain things that might work, but that it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. Our goal is to have some preliminary recommendations by early next year, and again, we anticipate having presentations going into 2021, even once the recommendations have been submitted. I want to thank you for attending today's inaugural panel presentation. I don't know what the final numbers were, but at last count, we had well over 500 individuals who had registered for the event, which I think really goes to show the importance of this topic. There will be, as you probably noted, the opportunity to ask questions. Colleagues will be monitoring the Q&A in the chat function, and we will be making sure that we get an opportunity to provide as many questions to our panelists as possible. And with that, I'm going to actually ask our panelists to introduce themselves, and I'm going to ask each of the panelists to introduce yourself by name, the current role that you have in the community, and if you want to talk about other roles that you might also have, that would be fine. The community in which you work, and some of you might have a larger footprint across the state than others. And then in one word, so here's the challenge, in one word, name one thing that you do that helps keep you emotionally safe or that's restorative in nature. And so with that, I'm going to ask Elliot Boyce to start us off with that. So your name, your role in the community in which you work, and one thing that keeps you safe.
Thank you, Garrett. Thank you, team, homemates, for having me today. My name is Elliot Boyce. I'm a senior investigator and director of the New York State Police Employee Assistance Program. I've been a police officer for 33 years. I have a team of coordinators that cover the state of New York that assist police officers within the ranks of the New York State Police, civilian staff, and outside agencies. And we really get at it to make sure that everyone is taking care of themselves. It's very important that we connect with people in other agencies. I will tell you my main function for getting involved and being part of the community is the idea of being able to help police officers in many cases that don't seek help. The one thing that I do for myself is I spend a lot of time engaged with the team that I work with because they are phenomenal, they're funny, they're caring people, and they will tell me when we are or if I'm falling off. So the most important thing is to stay connected with my team, and they help me a lot. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thanks for that, Elliot. Connectedness is so crucial in the work that we do. Next, I'm going to ask John Burgess to introduce himself.
My name is John Burgess. I'm the program coordinator for the Joseph P. Dwyer Vet to Vet program in Putnam County. It's a state-funded program. It's now in 26 counties in New York. I was born and raised in New York City, spent 20 years as a New York City police officer. At the age of 50, I joined the Army, deployed to Iraq as a trauma burn nurse. Came back and decided I still needed to do something for my country, my fellow people. I became a county coroner and got started with the Joseph P. Dwyer Vet to Vet program. And I wish I could be as good as Elliot is, but my single word for what I do to take care of myself is motorcycle. So it's an electric glide. That's my love, my therapy.
Excellent. Thank you, John. And last and certainly not least, Steve Kroll.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Stephen Kroll, and I'm the chief of Del Mar Bethlehem EMS, which is a mid-sized ambulance agency in Albany County. I have about 35 years of experience in emergency services and currently serve as the chair of the Regional Emergency Medical Services Council for the Hudson Mohawk Valleys, which is where we began to recognize the increase in prevalence of self-harm among EMS providers. So I've had the privilege of leading a group in our region that has begun looking at this issue. And in addition to trying to take action at our regional level, we have taken this to the state level, where I'm now the co-chair of what's about to be a technical advisory group to the New York State EMS Council to address this on the statewide level. And the one word I'll use to describe myself is lead. I like to help other people achieve their best, and I receive great satisfaction by using my abilities to help others.
Wonderful. Thank you, Steve. Thank you all for being a part of that first panel. And so the process, the flow this afternoon is really going to be a conversation, I think. That's what we're hoping to achieve. We've got some prompt questions. So I'm going to start with that first one. And, for our panelists, feel free to jump in with your reflections and thoughts on this. So the first question is, what are either personal or systemic obstacles for wellness and suicide prevention within your field and across all public safety fields?
if I can start, or Elliot, but I think one of the problems, there's several of them. One's systemic, but I think in the systemic issue, it's the easy answer is no. And if you think about it, no matter where you go, whether or not you're dealing with the VA, he doesn't qualify, couch surfing doesn't mean he's homeless, he hasn't been in the facility long enough, he's not really addicted to drugs. It always seems to be that the answer systemically in dealing with the VA, that you can say no. And then you have no follow-up for that. And what you really need are people that are advocates for either the police officer or the veteran in that particular situation. It's really having to do with the veteran. And, you know, if statistics are showing that it's more than 50% of individuals that are dying by suicide, and that 50% does not access the VA, and then also you have a group that's over 50 and has never been deployed to a war zone, we're missing a large portion of veterans that we shouldn't be missing. And the biggest thing is isolation. So systemically, how do you get the VA, which is big VA, and the way we refer to it as big VA is that you have to come to them. They don't come to you. You have to go and find them. And again, you have to fit this very narrow description qualification that is a veteran, whether or not you served more than 172 days active duty service. If you were in the reserves and either never deployed, you're not a veteran. If you were in the National Guard, never federalized, you're not a veteran. And again, the easy answer is no. And what do you do to do the workaround for that? As far as personally, the hardest thing for me to do is I open up the door, but it's up to them, the individual, to walk through it. And it's hard for me to sort of step back and just look at them and think, well, I know what this person needs to do, but it's really up to them to get to that position where they've decided that this is what they need to do to get help. And to sit back and let them travel their own destiny. And, you know, we're there to help them. I speak mostly as the veteran part, but I would say back in the 80s and 90s when I was a detective, I know fellow officers that killed themselves. There was nothing in place by the New York City Police Department to support you, period, end of story. Now in the VA, you know, there is resiliency training and all these other things. But again, you have to come to them. They're not going to go and find you. And I think it's really the role of peer support models like ourselves, Stephen and Elliot, that do the outreach and act as the liaison. So, you know, that's one of the biggest things. And then the last thing I'll leave it with you is that people use the term stigma, and I really think that we should change that from stigma to shame. Because, you know, I say to people, not only am I a Hair Club for Men spokesman, I'm also a client. For me to get over my own shame of needing help, and as a police officer to deal with my own shame of I'm not the strong person, I have to deal with my own shame as to I failed or I'm weak. If we can change it and say that there is no shame here and eliminate the stigma, I think you'll get a lot more people to step forward and be more receptive and take my hand and be able to go where their life is going to lead them. Thank you.
Perfect. To piggyback off of what John said, working with law enforcement officers around the state of New York, the biggest thing obviously is the easy word, which is stigma. And it's the stigma of I am weak, and it's the stigma of I may not be accepted. I mean, there's a stigma that goes back as far as when everyone was in high school, elementary school. If you were different or you was perceived to be different, you became an outcast. And what happens is that stigma and that mentality travels through people's lives until they get to a point where now they're in law enforcement or some type of emergency response team or unit. And they never want to be that person who's considered to be the outsider. So they continue to do the same things over and over again, avoiding reaching out for help, avoiding doing things differently. And one of the things that I saw recently, and it was in a football game, it was a running back, and they basically told him in the huddle, do not score a touchdown. But all his life, he ran for the field goal, or he ran for the touchdown, he ran for the end zone. And at the very moment when he wasn't supposed to cross that line, he did, cost his team the game. And that's what it's like with law enforcement. We're always running to the end zone for the final result, and it's hard for us to step back and basically realize that we need to either seek help or do something differently. When you talk about systemically, when you talk about agencies and a lot of police agencies around the state, we assist agencies, but I think the acceptance of changing 100% and putting in place structure in the police department to ensure that people are able to get help and not be ostracized, in the sense of, one, as John said, it is voluntary. And we, my team, for the State Police Employee Assistance Team, we get out there and we let people know that we're available. We wear our ID, we wear our patches, we let them know that we're available to them. But if their next line supervisor is not 100% on board, then that will deter them from basically seeking additional help. So you talk about systemically, you talk about the system, you know, we have a great system in place, I believe, with state police, and it was mentioned in the governor's report as far as helping. And what we do is, as the director of the State Police Employee Assistance Program, I report directly to a colonel. And with that being said, there's no middle person, there's no one to obstruct the information and go that way. And our colonel is not asking me what happened, what's going on. His main or her concern is the person being taken care of? And we say, yes, we're on it. And there's no further question. There's no, well, what did you do? What's going on? So the importance of, one, is voluntary, two, confidentiality, and being able to assure police officers around the state that their confidentiality is going to be taken care of, because the reality is that police officer that reaches out for help, if he receives or believes he may lose his weapon, he realizes he will not be able to go to work. She will not be able to go to work. And if they're out of work, now a whole lot of things fall into play, whether it be financial, relationship within home, relationship with family, community, and embarrassment. So when you talk about it being voluntary, it's very important, but being voluntary also means us being present, prepared, and properly trained. It also means that we have to be out there and on people at all times. And with that being said, the field of law enforcement is unique, but some of the things that really impact law enforcement is universal to everybody, whether it be veterans, people that work in corrections, people work in OMH, people that work in, just common everyday citizens. The backdrop is really simple. No one wants to be perceived as different. And until, like John said, we take away the stigma of that and we make it to the point where people realize that it's okay to get help, things won't change. But they're changing in the field of law enforcement with peer-to-peer assistance and really good coordinators and really good peers that are committed to helping other police officers. And I'll end with this. Police officers basically are not just going to talk to the average person. But if you have a crew of police officers that are willing to help, they're more likely to talk to a police officer before they will go home and tell their spouse about what they're dealing with. And that's really crucial, to have a good team and willing to help and participate. So that's my perspective.
Thank you, Elliot.
I'd like to very much identify with the comments by Elliot and John about the stigma and the self-recognition of people that need for help. As emergency services professionals, this is true in EMS, and I think it's true in many of the other disciplines. We are taught to be stubbornly self-reliant from the beginning of our careers. And so we've had a hard time making it okay for a first responder to ask for help. We've also had a hard time getting other first responders to see somebody who's in pain and be able to walk up to them and say, hey, are you okay? How can I help you? And so we suffer in silence. It's some of the things that John and Elliot mentioned about being tough as professionals, about wanting to be able to maintain our job. And so we really do need to find a way to break down those barriers so that people know it's okay to ask for help, and so that people that see someone who needs help are okay saying, hey, can I help you? So it's really a two-way street. And I know we're going to talk later in this call more about peer-to-peer. I want to mention a couple other things, though. We really don't have great data on this statewide yet. And I know that Governor Cuomo has said that it's important for us to begin to get great data. But I think that there was a time when people who were involved with self-harm and committed suicide, the family sort of didn't want to talk about it. And as John said, there was some shame. And we concluded people's affairs and we tried not to talk about it. There's a prevalence of this in EMS. I am here today and involved with this because in my small county of Albany County, We've had several EMS providers commit suicide in the last several years. And one of them, no one ever talked about it, and no one ever really knew what happened. But I also remember going to the memorial service for a paramedic, where the paramedic's father stood up in front of hundreds of us and says, I don't want this to happen to you. You need to take care of yourselves. We need to all get involved. So we have to be able to talk about this. We have to be aware of this. It has to be something that we are aware of and our community is aware of and our government is aware of. I also want to talk about one other thing at this point, and that is some of the causality. Underlying circumstances are something we have to look at. It's not just the job that drives people to feel badly about themselves, to feel a burden, to feel alone, and to feel like they can't handle it. Especially in emergency medical services, we're under a lot of pressure. And I shouldn't say especially in emergency medical services because there's nobody on this panel whose profession is not one of the most demanding professions we can. And if across our task force that brings in other public safety professionals, there are those bad calls we have, those bad jobs that we go on that leave an impression on us that make us feel badly about what we were able to do, how we're able to help. There's the post-traumatic stress that people feel, but there's also another big factor, and that is we tend to be people that are fatigued, exhausted because we work so hard, we work long hours, we don't work normal shifts. We tend to be working extra hard because we want to support our families. We tend to take a lot of our baggage and we internalize it. And so there's high prevalences of family problems in our professions. We sometimes have trouble making ends meet because we work so hard, yet we don't earn great salaries. We want to put our kids through college. We want to take care of our families. And so when we take a look at the causality of self-harm among public safety professionals, some of it is perhaps related to the job, but some of it is life itself. And we have to recognize that. And what can we do to help public safety professionals that are tired, exhausted, working multiple jobs, perhaps separated from their families for whatever reason, perhaps having fiscal problems. And if they see themselves as I'm alone and I'm a burden, they may commit themselves to self-harm, even though it's not something that's necessarily job related. So it's important that we look at all the different causalities as we work.
There's certainly some themes that I believe all three of you referenced, this idea of a stigma and shame, right? And to your point, Steve, that you made early on, I think this idea of not just us recognizing if I'm having a problem, let me reach out to you, but also to feel empowered and confident and competent that if I see my brother or sister struggling, that I can be compelled to reach out to them without feeling as if I'm being intrusive. It sounds like, you know, there are some structural barriers, perhaps, is one of the things I heard within some of the work that you all do or have done in the past, just in terms of maybe a culture of help seeking. And I think this idea of, you know, even if it's being promoted, help seeking is being promoted, if my immediate superior isn't on board with that, that can in and of itself certainly be an obstacle. So really very rich conversation, and it sort of leads, I think, to the next question. And you've begun, each of you, I think, a little bit to start addressing this, but we really want to take a look at, so from your experience, and you all, you know, I didn't bother to count up how many years of experience there are amongst the three of you, but I imagine there's quite a bit sitting just in this space right now. But in your experience, you know, what activities, what policies, what strategies have you seen that have worked to promote wellness? So let's start way upstream, right? And resilience, or address suicide among your profession. So what works? You know, it doesn't have to have an evidence base. It doesn't have to be on a registry. But what have you seen that intuitively has helped to address this?
I'll start this time. I think for us, one of the things that we realized early is you have to be present. right? So, and you have to be proactive. And for us, what we basically taken with the State Police Employee Assistance Program is that we're going to be present, proactive, and prepared at all times. So one of the things we realize is some of the old timers, some of the police officers have been around for a long time that are set in their ways. It's always going to be difficult to get at them or get to them. But we realize that the recruits that are in the academy that are coming out fairly new, we have to engage with them and be on point with them early on. So we make it a point to get to the recruits early, within the first 48 hours, 72 hours when they're in the academy. The key point there is to let them know that we're available to them and their family. Their family communicate with them. So we see them beginning to that end, then we're going to see them go out there. We are. The second thing that we the people that have 5 days, some investigations, some special task force. So it's something what we call the name the Academy Takeover. Academy was basically anytime there was training in the academy, whether it was going to be firearms, scuba diving, IDS for instructor elementary school, any training that went to the academy, we would attend. We take or send someone from my team to that training because now we got the people that have been on the field, you know, or working with 5 to 10 years who's training. We got a connection with them at this point. So that's really work. The thing we did was we did this thing called branding. You know, Nike, Adidas, all of them, they have their special brand, which everyone clearly identifies. So what we did is we created a logo. We got, and people donated money to help. So get this equipment. And what's nice about it is now when we show up, so what people identify. So, you know, like our SWORD team, when we walk into the room, everyone knows who's it. You know, those are the tough guys. You know, they come with their military garb, but there's no confusion exactly. We will and know who we were. So I joined real and connecting with the seasoned veterans has been really beneficial to us. And we just stay on it. We just, if there's a critical incident, we go. There's not going to ever be a question. I assured my colonel, if there's a shooting, if there's a bad crash, if there's an infancy death, we will be just to check on the troopers or the members right off the bat, because that's key that they know that we're there just as much as anyone who's going to come to investigate their action is going to be there. So those are some of the things we put in place. It's been working. It's nice when I show up to a station clear across from where I live and I walk in and I'm in plain clothes, just checking the computer, and the guy goes, "Hey, I know you. You're the guy from EAP." And I realized at that point that our mission is being accomplished.
Thanks, Elliot. That's a great list. I'd like to build on what you said and a couple things. First is getting leaders to carry the message for us. Certainly, the governor making this a priority in the state, and the state is, you know, leadership starts at the top is very important, and the Office of Mental Health leading this. So, Gara, thank you to you and your team. But we need leaders at all public safety agencies to make this a priority. You know, I was speaking with a psychologist this week who gave me this example. He specialized in work with eating disorders and college students. They finally started to make some progress with eating disorders in college students when they got the presidents of the sororities to become the message leaders with the college students about body image and body shame. And so that's just a great example for us. I do think that resilience training and awareness should be part of the foundational training and curriculum of all of our public safety professions. So I think we should devote a night of EMT class to this. I think we should devote a night of Firefighter 1. Elliot talked about how the New York State Police do this at the Police Academy. I think you know, John probably could talk about what the military does with people entering the military. I think it should become part of our foundational training. I think it should be a requirement that the EMT class covers this, so that's another piece of it. I also think that things that have been helpful is first putting together comprehensive lists of resources available in a community, getting those lists out there to people. So I live in my county, people should know that there's a New York State hotline, there's a national awareness hotline, there's a local county Department of Health hotline. Who are their resources, and making those lists public and prominent. I also think having behavioral health professions on parity with physical health is very important. And I know that's something that we've discussed in the healthcare context of the nation over the last several decades. My specific agency has always had a medical director who oversees the fitness and readiness of our people for duty. 2 years ago, we found a behavioral psychologist who is also an emergency medical technician, and we asked him to be our behavioral health director. He sits on parity with our medical directors, realizing that fitness for duty isn't just whether your knees are good, whether you can lift, whether you can carry. It's also whether you have the emotional ability to do the job. And that's been a tremendous, tremendous benefit for my little EMS agency. The last thing I'll mention is connecting people with resources. We have a lot of challenges in our healthcare system today with mental health resources that are available for people in the long term. I know at our agency we have an affiliated system program, and we could find a counselor through an EAP that could help somebody with 1, 2, 3, or 4 sessions. Connecting that person to those long-term resources is really difficult, and I think that's a place where public policy has to look at it. How can we make sure that our public safety professionals, at this time when they're taxed by, whether it be the military taxed by their responsibilities of defending our nation, EMTs and firefighters working under the COVID environment, or public safety professionals, police officers keeping us safe. This is a really tough time to have those long-term things in effect. And I recognize I say this when we as a nation, our mental health system is under great stress. We are fortunate that telemedicine is now something that's available, and it's not always something that has to happen in person. I thought it was interesting that Elliot mentioned that his experience that police officers want to talk to a police officer. Something that sort of parallel to that is we find that in EMS, an EMS person in pain doesn't want to go to the local hospital, because you walk into the local hospital, everyone in the emergency room, you know them. And the fact that we could connect people by telemedicine to somebody that's not in the community now, I could be in New York talking to a counselor that's hundreds of miles away. That allows people to maintain some of the mobility perhaps they need when they're asking for help.
Thank you, Steve.
I guess that means I'm up. One of the things, to dovetail off of both what Elliot and Stephen have said, and for me, basically, it's a matter of trust. Whoever it is, no matter where they are, no matter what they're doing, they have to trust the person that they're going to reach out to. I don't know of anybody who's going to go and see whether or not it's a clinical professional, or whether or not it's a peer, or whether or not whoever it may be, if they do not trust them, if they do not trust what they're going to say or what they're going to do, you're useless. Nothing's really going to happen. So for us as peers, we've walked the walk. I bought the t-shirt, got the coffee mug, and I could be there with them. I'm not going to tell them that they're broken. I'm not going to tell them that I'm going to fix them. I'm going to tell them that I'm there to walk with them through whatever program they're needing. And most of the people that I try and find are the ones that are the outliers. I read a great book by a guy by the name of Anderson, who was a triple amputee from an EFP in Iraq and lost 3 of his limbs. And, many people say now, well, we have to think outside the box. And his attitude is, there is no box. You just have to think of a way of doing these things. So most of the people that I find, the reason I find them is because of my relationship with the community, with the police officers, with EMS, with the psychiatrist in the emergency room, because they know me and they trust me and they can make that referral. and I've been called by the police or the emergency room. And so to get rid of that shame, you have to show them that I've been there with you. I understand what you're doing. I'm not going to tell you this is how you're going to fix yourself. But trust me, and this is what we can do together. We've done a lot of outreach programs, which include not only specifically just the veteran, like equestrian programs, baseball games. It's not that I'm a director of entertainment, but it's how you get to meet the other veterans in the community and the family members, which are an extremely important part of this. I set up my table all the time, whether or not it's with First Line, which is for first responders, or for veterans. Very few people come over to my desk, or table when it's, a mental health table and says, oh yeah, I'm a schizophrenic. Let me take one of those pamphlets and, I'll thank you very much. It's usually up to the family members who will call. And I would tell you that the majority of my calls have been from friends and family of the veteran or the police officer. They know me as being, an overweight, middle-aged ex-ghetto cop from New York City in the 80s and 90s, and they can talk to me. And along the lines what Stephen said, we have a First Line, which is a warm line for police officers, but you don't necessarily want to call the warm line and be speaking to your chief of police or somebody that's going to know you. So we always try and keep it as anonymous. We have a 24-hour warm line for veterans. They can call 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. There is no stigma to it. There is no shame attached to it. It's just an opportunity to be able to talk to people. And part of the last thing, there's a whole bunch of stuff we could probably say. It's the 24-hour access. There's the no shame to who, what you're doing is somebody's already been there before you. But I also don't get involved in sort of the identity politics. It's sort of basically for me, if you raise your right hand to support and defend the Constitution against all enemies, both foreign and domestic, you're good to go with me. I don't have a restriction that you served over here. This is how many, years you served, or you did this, or you did that. So it's really sort of an inclusive family. And if I can't help you, I'll find the person that can. And to tell you how successful the peer support program has been in the Dwyer program, it started in 4 counties in New York State. It's up to 26 counties now. The governor is looking to make it in all 62 counties. And every single one of us can give you anecdotal evidence where we've taken somebody on the verge of suicide, has tried to commit suicide, drug addiction, homelessness, and have helped to move them forward. We were thinking, Stephen had mentioned something about training as well as Elliot. If you look at all the composites that play into that, sometimes instead of just telling people, well, you're going to go through your resiliency training and, suck it up, buttercup, that type of thing. But maybe if you give them more coping skills, this is how you manage money. This is how you manage this. This is how you manage that. We're not telling you, anything else. Just these are some of the tools as you go through life that you may never have been experienced to. And these are things that will help you. And here's a resource for you. Here's a number you can call. I can't drag them there. I can't force them to do it, but at least they know it's there. And if in many instances somebody calls me at 2 o'clock and, John, I'm an alcoholic and I hide vodka in the basement, and what can you do to help me? And I tell people the wheels of my truck go round and round. I'll come to you, brother, and we'll sit down, we'll have a cup of coffee, and let's see what we can do together. And what can we do together to get you moving in that right direction? So for me, the number one activity that's worked very well is peer support, whoever that person is. That person can walk and talk with them, whether you're a police officer or a firefighter. I've seen deaths most of my life. You're looking at an 18-year-old volunteer firefighter who's looking at a dead 10-year-old. Who comforts him? Who talks to him and teaches him how to deal with this? So he has to learn also that, and the person he's going to learn it from is the senior firefighters. Listen, when I have a hard time, this is who I call, and this is where I go. Sadly for me, 40 years of alcohol and denial, I thought was working pretty well, but it wasn't. So, you have to be able to trust people in your own sphere. And then that person has to have the resources available to make the right references and referrals, and to be able to open the door for them and help them to walk through that door to get help if that's what they need. And just support. The last thing I'm going to tell you is just because they might be resilient now does not mean that in 10 years Yeah, no. I didn't have well, yeah, I did, but I mean, I didn't really have the one that scared the bejesus out of me of a flashback of auditory hallucinations until 8 years after coming back from Iraq. So it's not like, right after I came back from Iraq, the Army tries, listen, do you have any thoughts of this? Do you have any? Look, dude, all I want to do is get the hell out of here. Let's show me the paper. I'll sign it. I'll get out of here. 8 years later, I'm in trouble. And so who do I turn to? And I turn to people that I trusted. And they were the ones that helped guide me in the direction that I've taken. So, for a lot of people, that's the biggest thing. Trust, not to show shame, and to be a peer, and not to tell them, you're broken, and look at me, I'm going to fix you. Look at me, I'm here to help you. What can I do? Thank you.
Thank you, John.
If I just may follow up on that question also, John, amazing. You talk about people who have to volunteer for the service, but as I'm looking at some of the questions that are popping up, and quite often is the magic word of where's the money? And I saw hey, someone's program, how come they don't give us money? So I will tell you, I can use 10 more peer contacts. What I know I don't have is the option of giving up or quitting on anybody. So we make it happen with what we have. And some of the things that we created or you really lean to is, for us, we have fortunate that we have a Lieutenant Duffy, Harry Duffy, who's at the Police Academy. He used Valor program they brought in. He did this whole wellness series in which he pretty much brought in fans in order for them wellnesses, resilience, and importance in making sure they're taking care of themselves and taking care of the guys, which is huge. But that doing programs is really people. We do things like Zoom meetings. I'll have Zoom meetings with my team because they're spread across the state just for us to connect. On the same token, I'm doing a Zoom meeting for the spouses want to know who we're spending time with, who we're connecting to. Also do things like one of my coordinators has a enforcement, because if you could tell a police officer that, look, you can go to AA and get assistance with other police officers, they're more likely to come on. Tell them that we have a counselor on staff or a doctor on staff. Dr. Huggins, who's around for a long time, I remember the state police, now went on to become a psychologist, and he's on our staff. I can say, listen, I have Dr. Huggins on staff who's a former trooper. He'll understand. And we took these, we really have to outside the box at times to make sure we get everything available for us. But what we don't have is an option. We don't have the money. That's just the easy excuse. Everyone can use more. And we use programs like Telehill that are specific to law enforcement, in which we send our police officers because they get there, they're going to find people that have similar interests as them as they battle, struggle, their depression. We realize that a lot of police officers are displaced, particularly troopers who may grow up in New York City and end up in Buffalo or Plattsburgh, which is going to be a complete culture shock to them. So we have the ability to reach out to them. It is more is always better at times. We have to be prepared to work with the
Really extremely rich conversation, and just I want to try to summarize and see if there's anything I'm missing. But a couple of things again with this conversation that I heard. Training, and Elliot, I think you mentioned before, standardized is something that's been helpful. So it's a shared language, and people across the state know if they're calling on your support services, they sort of know what it's going to look like. It's going to be consistent across the board. Trust and connections are really important. Like, who's the messenger, and also leadership carrying the message. Sounds like it's obviously extremely important. Resources, access. That these services and supports need to be available when people need them. We don't schedule our crisis Monday through Friday, 9 to 5. And known and trusted colleagues really important. And then all of you mentioned, I think in your own way, that this is a marathon, not a sprint, is sort of what I took away from it. And so, John, to your point, it wasn't until 8 years after you got out of the service that things hit the fan. And so I think collectively, one of the things I heard, again, for all of you, is that the supports need to have a long view, not just the short term, as part of it. Any follow-up on this, or do we want to move to the next questions?
Just going to mention, you mentioned about funding, which is one of the reasons why the state cut mental health funding by 20% across the board. So we now have to start looking at alternate means to try and fund us, as well as, using veterans because volunteers. And there are many of them. But one of the things that you just mentioned is that this is not a one and done program. This is not like I fixed you tomorrow and, hey, you're done, good, there's the door, have a nice day. This is a long-term, consistent, thorough effort across the board. So I think we should look at that as part of not only continued funding, but continued effort on our part to make sure that it doesn't get dropped by the wayside.
To follow up on what John said, I think the richness of today's conversation talks about the interdisciplinary nature of what we're talking about today. We all know that we face funding challenges locally, regionally, statewide, nationally. COVID hasn't made it any easier. And one of the things that I take away from today is I need to be talking with my local police department. I need to be talking with my local fire departments. I need to be talking with my local veterans groups. How can we, if we can't all get all the resources that we need, how can we pool our talents, whether it be in my smaller community, whether in my county, whether in my region, cross-pollinate each other. Gara, really, that's what the state OMH is trying to do with us as a group here statewide, and we can replicate that at the local level to make up for perhaps some of what we can't have in the richness of our needs.
And I appreciate that reflection, Steve. And I think that's spot on. We can't be all things to all people, right? But if who are my local partners? Who are my regional partners, right? If there are limitations to what I can do as a department, but I know that I can reach out a hand, and that there are others in the community who have skin in the game, then I think that really does have a multiplier effect, that we're not in this alone. And I think that's an important message in this work in general. Right?
And Gara, I just would add that I don't take my desire to work with my colleagues across in the disciplinary fields as that we have more resources to this. Today, if you drive down the street in your neighborhood, you're going to see people with lawn signs that say, "Thank a healthcare worker," or I support my local police. We're in a time where public safety professionals are so critical to the communities that we live in. And I do think that, you started this question about what public policies might we have. I think public policymakers do need to recognize this. And to the extent there are lots of priorities, the more we can float this higher up that list, the better it's going to be for us to be able to deal with this crisis.
Excellent. So we have a couple of questions, discrete questions, and I want to put this out to the three of you. About specifically what public policies might you imagine that don't currently exist could impact the topic of suicide prevention amongst, the public safety fields. And also we have a separate question on what role does peer support have in wellness. And each of you has touched upon that. So I want to see, we've got a couple other questions after that we want to try to get to as well. But I want to make sure that we're doing due diligence, I guess, around sort of zeroing in. Is there anything, at least for now, missing from the conversation on what public policies might you imagine, either for your specific discipline or sort of across the board, and anything to add to the role of peer support? And I guess with that last part, I would also ask, in your own experience, are there limitations, or what might be the limitations to peer support?
I'll start. I think one of the biggest strategies that we could have, or one of the biggest resources we could have when it comes to law enforcement, probably first responders or any person on the phone on the call, is we need a legislation put out. And what we've had and we've seen in other states is for peer-to-peer responders, particularly in law enforcement, they have a statute that basically says they can't be harmed or attacked in any way, any repercussions for confidentiality, not sharing information, particularly with the echelon in the agency. So some type of legislation that says that peer support, peer-to-peer is protected, will give us even more power to say to an individual, yes, no matter what they say to us, they can't harm us. It's protected by law. That would be huge. Because now that I think people will be a little more comfortable understanding that your job is not going to be able to get their information or use it against them, particularly in the field of law enforcement. I saw something pop up on the screen that said Rubber Gun Squad, which goes along the same way with this. I think part of the problem also is misinformation. And misinformation is the fact that that old terminology of the Rubber Gun Squad, because people feel if they get help, they automatically lose their weapon. I think when you explain to people step by step what happens if they seek help, understanding that if you seek help and it's something that you are really at the point where you may be or having ideas of suicide, that doesn't mean it's automatically disqualified for having a weapon or being employed in law enforcement. It is better for you to get help or than to make a mistake. When it comes to, as far as additional strategies, I definitely think some type of state legislation, which we recommended at one point, understanding that there's misinformation, that if we could put correct information out, particularly when it deals with OMH, people think that for whatever reason, if the report goes up, they automatically get disqualified. That's not true. And at the end of the day, we all work together. You know, if you go to a bad car accident, there's going to be a trooper there. Chances are there's going to be a fireman there, whether it be a fireman, whether they be full-time firemen or volunteer firemen. At some point, you will connect with the nurse. So it's a long string. It's just like being in the family. You know, we go home as police officers, we go home to our spouse. And you go home to your spouse and as police officers, what we do probably similar to every other agency or any normal person on this call. How was your day? Fine. Anything happen? No. Everything okay? Yes. Now the difference that has changed is, particularly in this climate in law enforcement, police officers can't say that anymore because the spouse is going, I just saw it on the news. So there's clearly something going on. So now the stress from work is there, the stress from a caring spouse is there. And if I said it before, when you go to the next level, now you also have the young adult children that are in the household that may have the same opinion or different opinion as a law enforcement parent. So there's a lot of different dynamics, but at the end of the day, family dynamics help. And the fact that when you go to an incident, there's going to be EMS, there's going to be paramedics, there's going to be police officers, and we all need to know that we have to work together and seek help collectively.
Wonderful message, Elliot. Thank you.
Can I, and what Elliot said is right on. I mean, part of it is to change this perception, which in most police departments and in the military as well, is that it's more of a punitive action. Nobody really views it as assistance without shame, that they're going to help you. You know, one of the first things that, you know, people are afraid of is they're going to come and take my gun. And, you know, I tell people, you know, listen, I've carried a firearm for 40 years. I've carried either a revolver or a pistol or a rifle for 40 years. It's about as much a part of me as my hands and my arms are. That's how much it's been part of my life. And the first thing that somebody's going to say is that they're probably going to take that from you. You're taking my identity. You're taking me. You're taking that thing that makes me. So changing that perception so that people can look at it without fear is one of the things. And whether or not that's legislative, working in the red flag laws, how that's going to be. One of the other things is that, you know, as I mentioned, I'm part of the Dwyer program. It's one of the most successful peer-to-peer support programs in New York State. We have to argue every year for funding before the legislature. It's not part of the line item so that it comes into the budget every year. So just like people will say, yeah, we're going to fund something for the police to support them, Is it part of a long-term plan, or do I have to go up to Albany every year to fight for that money so that we could get support? And the last thing, I mean, I know that there are certain things that we can do. You know, we reach out to VFWs, American Legions, DAVs, you know, civic groups. If you're there, you're going to listen to me. I'm going to talk to you. But there's something that may happen that requires further authority, and that's simple things that you could probably do. The VA puts on top of all of their medicine bottles, if you're in crisis, call 1-800-273-TALK. Press 1 if you're a veteran. You know, Gary and I were talking and joking about growing up. I remembered my telephone number when I was a kid, Gramercy Fire 3361. Everybody should know this number. But again, how hard would it be to get the prescription companies to send out to the pharmacies to put in a cap? If you're in crisis, call 1-800-273-TALK. It's a simple thing. Then it's going to your you know, pistol ranges and to your gun shops and going to the order and saying, look, here's a sticker. Put it on every firearm that you sell on the box. If you're in crisis, call this number. I mean, those are things that sort of, you know, we're doing on our own by ourselves, but it would be a lot easier if it became a sort of a statewide mandate. I mean, granted, you know, statewide mandates are great. They don't fund it, but, you know, it's one of these things of trying to get something that goes just beyond my little slice of the pie. It goes wider. And if it goes wider, then other people are going to start looking at, you know what, that's a brilliant idea. You know, that's a good thing. And then you'll be able to move past that. And then the other part of it is, and Stephen had mentioned it earlier, you know, being comfortable to be able to speak to somebody. We teach Safe Talk, which is suicide awareness. And it really gives people normal, you know, we teach anybody and everybody, school teachers, bus drivers, people in stores, and veterans, to be aware of what suicide is and how to approach it and not to be afraid. And if we could make that more accessible across the state, I think you would do a great job at trying to, you know, we're not going to make it zero, you know, and the veteran suicide rate is 22 a day. And after a while, people are just, you know, getting tired of the number. And I think if we sort of change our perception to one is too many. You sort of change the perception that you know, look, I'm here for you. It doesn't make a difference if you're a number. I'm here to help you. But again, you have to teach people the awareness. You know, as a brief example, we had a veteran who said, you know, look, my friend calls me up and says that, you know, this is what's going on. Who do I call? And the bottom line was, he did. He just called you. You know, he reached out to you for help. Now what are you going to do? And so teaching something like Safe Talk or Assist gives the tools to everybody to be able to just better approach it and to help. So, you know, if we could do some simple things like that, I think don't bite off too much that we can't chew, but we can move forward.
John, I'm glad you mentioned Safe Talk. You know, Safe Talk is great, one great option. You know, another option is QPR training from the QPR Institute, which is question, persuade, and report. I think this is where the border crosses between talking about public policy and peer-to-peer. If we can get every public safety professional, every veteran, everyone in our lines of work somehow to get some of that foundational training. You know, QPR today, you can take QPR for $29.99 online. You know, one of the things that's happened in the last year or two is a lot of things that were always taught in classroom, you had to travel and go to, can now be done online. I think that some funding for resilience training for public safety professionals and military professionals and veterans would make a lot of sense. If any EMT could log on to the QPR website and not have to pay the $29.99 and take resilience training, and we could either make it a requirement of our local agency or make it something we strongly encourage. Someone has to pay that $29.99, right? My EMS agency might be able to afford it, the department might be able to afford it, and others might not. Another thing, I think, since that this call has a lot of people on it that are in similar to those of us that are on the panel that are in roles professionally and trying to help people through these crises. One thing to think about is sort of some of the drivers of suicidality. And so I want to mention Joiner's interpersonal theory of suicide. Joyner has done some writing on this, and I think is known nationally as an authority. And there are a couple things that in his theory go into suicide. First of all, the capacity for suicide. Second of all, feeling of being alone, and third of all, feeling that you're a burden or perceived burdensomeness. One of the challenges that all of us face is that the capability for suicide is something that is somewhat baked into you if you're a police officer, or you're a firefighter, or you're a veteran, or you're an EMT. You've seen death. Death doesn't do the same way it might the ordinary civilian. You have access to the tools. You have your weapon. If you're in the medical profession, you have access to medications. You've given those medications. You use those weapons. So it's hard to take away the ability or capacity for someone to do self-harm once you already have it. It's sort of baked into our professions. So you really have to look at that desire for suicide. And so if the criteria are I am alone and I am a burden, that's something we really have to figure out how to help with. So in learning about this, I really pay attention to when I look at the people that work with me on the ambulance squad, or I look at people that I run into professionally, that I am alone is important. And that comes down to what a peer can be to a peer. Somebody who is usually used to always be involved and engaged suddenly is very quiet. Well, maybe there's something going on there. Somebody, there are signs a lot of times when somebody is not feeling good about themselves, and then they're at risk. And so we really have to be able to think about how to help people not feel alone and not feel a burden. I don't have a lot of experience on the burden side, but I think that in one of our prep calls, John, you talked about how people spend their entire life in the profession and then they retire. And sort of what comes next. I'm not driven by that next shift, by that next tour. So that I am alone and I'm a burden is something we all ought to be thinking about.
If I can just finish up on what Elliot said, which was that sort of burden. I mean, for us, we use the term isolation. They isolate themselves. The misery I know is better than putting myself out there and putting a risk to it. But as you mentioned, it's that change in your lifestyle. For the military and for the police department, I was part of the New York City Police Department, a source of greater good than myself. And I would be willing to sacrifice my life for my partners. And then after 20 years, all of a sudden, that identity is gone. And same thing with the military. You're in the military for X number of years. This is your life, your identity. And then all of a sudden, it's gone. And you can even translate that into business. I was vice president of IBM, and this is what I did. And I ran this, and I ran this. And then all of a sudden, you retire. And unless you have some sort of backup plan, what do? You were part of this greater good organization. You did something amazing, and now all of a sudden that's been taken away from you. Same thing with EMS and firefighters. You were part of this greater service to others, and then all of a sudden it's taken away. And what do you do, and where do you go to get support? And then it's the ones that don't, the cellar dwellers, as we call them. They're not in my office. I got to go find them. And how do I find them? And where do I find them? And how do I relate to them? And then again, that brings you back to that peer support. You can walk in and you can say, we walk the walk, talk the talk. We're there to support you in whatever way we are. And again, back to shame. I'm embarrassed. I'm shameful of the way that I'm living in the basement. I'm shameful that I can't support myself. I'm ashamed I can't do this. And again, getting that support. And if I don't have the answers, I'll find the person who can, regardless of who they are.
This conversation makes me think quite a bit. I've had the good privilege of knowing individuals who are attempt survivors, people who have made an attempt and are alive. And many of those individuals will often share this idea of suicide prevention can't be just about stopping people from dying. It's also got to be looking at a life worth living. And so that's a lot of what I think I'm hearing as part of this conversation is, yes, we want to prevent people from acting on those thoughts, right? But then what, sort of. So I think that's all gets baked together. We had one question I wanted to throw out from, go ahead, John.
I was going to say, one of the greatest things, no matter who the people are that are the veterans that I'm dealing with, no matter how bad they were, no matter where they were, one of the things that lights them up and gets them engaged is, hey, can I help you? What can I do to help find other people that deal with addiction like I was, dealt with jail like I did, poverty like I did, homelessness like I did? When you run into people, particularly people in the police department and the military, if you start to turn around and look at them and go, I need your help, what do you think you could do to help me help other people? They now are part of that greater good again. They are now part of that team again. They're now part of that I have a reason to live again. So just exactly what you said. It's I think if you turn it around to them and how can you help me, you'll see them change from just being I'm not worth something to, hey, I've got something I can contribute.
Absolutely. We had one question that came in that I want to just put out real quick before we pivot maybe to the last couple. And the question is, how can we make legislation passing peer-to-peer confidentiality laws when in this person's profession, most people complete suicide because they're doing something wrong at work and there's a duty to report? So I guess operationally, if any of you wouldn't, be able to respond to that, wondering.
Fortunately for us in what my unit is, there's two things and it was 3 times when we're actually mandatory that we're going to report and disclose or break confidentiality. Harm to yourself, harm to somebody else, elder abuse or child abuse. So what's happening is a lot of times when people are in situations, they struggle. But what we've done is we always want to be present. And that's the reason why I said being present is really key. Again, someone who's basically committed to the act of dying by suicide, we just want to somehow engage or interact in their life or infuse our way into their life somehow. Like John said, they may be in a dark place. They're not walking into the door and walking through the door and telling us. We have to be proactive and being out there and engage with them. So to really answer the question, yes, a lot of people are dying by suicide because something happens on the job and they feel like the only way out due to the embarrassment and the stigma of something coming out that's going to be reported on them is to die by suicide. What we try to explain to them is we spend time, if we can engage with someone, that's why when there's a personnel complaint through the Division of State Police, and what a personnel complaint is, anything that happens on the job that's going to require some type of disciplinary action, we've asked the state police to give us a heads up when those things are happening. So we know. So what we do is we will make contact with that person and we're proactive along the way of giving them coping skills or at least allowing them to know that this is not the first time this has happened and someone has survived and they're on the other side. Or if necessary, if we realize or they realize in their mind that they're no longer going to be a police officer, which in some cases is really daunting to many of the A-type personality police officers we have, we start preparing them for what they could do next. So we're having those conversations way before they get to the disciplinary. And if we find that someone's being terminated, we as the Employee Assistance Program, we are notified. So say, for example, somebody's going in for disciplinary. If they're going to be arrested, they're going to be punished, or they're going to be suspended, anything along those lines, we are there. And one of my coordinators, who are all police officers to speak, will respond. And when that person walks out the door, we're standing there with them. And we ask they give us enough time. The same thing with termination, same thing with retirement. When people are going off to retirement, they're losing their family. Not the family that they go home to, but the family of law enforcement. And that separation, that's really daunting to people, especially people that have not prepared for it. So we definitely talk to retirees. As they're going out, we'll call them, let you know we're still available to you. The retirees that are already out there, we'll make contact with them. People that are out on COVID, we call them also. And also the one that is oftentimes forgotten are the people that are out on extended sick leave. I tore my knee one year, And when I was out on my knee injury, I thought I was young. I'm going to make it back to work. I'll be back in 30 days. I'll be back. And the doctor said to me, you need to plan your next 6 months. And in my mind, I know I was coming back, but so also something in the back of my mind said, I might not make it back. So those are the people that we reach out to. Those are the people we connect with. Those are the people we stay connected to, because you're right with the question. There's some people that will commit, die by suicide because no one's talking to them. It's like, here's your punishment, have a nice day. And that cannot happen. We will do our best at all times. I'll ask the person that's issuing the punishment, we're 30 minutes away. You need to hold them there. Do not let them leave with the mindset that this is a hopeless day. So that's how we try to combat it with the state police. And it's, again, just being proactive. And the best part is, if we did all the things right in the beginning, which is making sure that we're proactive, present, and prepared, when we go to see that person, they're going to know it's us. So it's not going to be, oh, this is some stranger coming to talk to me. They go, it's Elliot, and I know he's EAP. It's Sal, he's EAP. Angela, oh, I know them. We do little things in order to make sure that we stay connected with people. Prime example, real simple. There was a police agency that recently buried one of their members. He died, unfortunately, due to a boating. And all they wanted for the agencies to have everyone to have black masks on. So we looked out into the crowd and we saw that there was some agencies that didn't have black masks. Simple thing. We got the black mask. We walked out and we handed it to the other agencies, which gave us a chance not only to help that PD, but to engage with the 10 other PDs that we were able to get masks to. So now they know us. So it's constantly being proactive, being prepared, and being present is the way you counteract someone who may, pass away from suicide based on some type of punishment. It's just some simple things we try to get accomplished.
Thank you for that, Elliot. It's very eloquent and simple on many respects. It's being prepared, right? And it's being there in the long haul, and ensuring a level of connectedness so that if things go south or look like they might start to go south, you get notified, your team gets notified, and you can walk with people along the way. And so, again, it in many respects is going back to, I think, connectedness in relationships. There's a couple other questions that we have as the panel, and I want to put them together for you all, and we'll spend the last of the bulk of our time in conversation before we pivot to opening it up to more broadly to questions. The last two questions are, what role either does or can family and friends play in wellness and resilience and suicide prevention? And you've all sort of talked about family and partners and stuff like that, but maybe go a little bit deeper. And then the same question as it relates to our community partners, right? I believe there are quite a few of individuals on the call today who are not necessarily involved in public safety, but might come from different disciplines. They're of the communities that you all live and work and play in. So what can our community partners do, right, as it relates to wellness and prevention?
When it comes to community partners, I think it's important for all of us to take a survey of what we have around us. So I'm based in Albany, New York. We have two major health systems. We have several major physician groups. We have got, if you were to, I'm old enough that I was about to say open up the white pages, and but if you were to do a Google search, you're gonna and put in mental health support in Albany, New York, or our 6-county region. Lots of different groups are going to come up. And so I think that, as much as I think we should be working across interdisciplinary with other public safety professions in our region or in our community, I think we have to look at what else is out there on mental health support. There are mental health professionals that work in my community that provide support for members of the community that are, not at all connected to public safety professions that need help. They have offices, they have locations. We've got universities in some of our communities that have schools of social work and schools of psychiatry. We have got certainly social workers affiliated with our county governments. In my town, we have very well developed senior citizens department. All that we ought to be looking for all these different people that have anything to do with mental health and see how they can be their partners. Because for what all of us on this work group that you've brought together, Gara, support, we're all community servants. We are dedicated ourselves in some way or another to helping that greater community that we live in. And so I think that we have a really compelling message to go out to that greater community and say, hey, this is a way those of you that are involved in behavioral health, that are involved in wellness, can help us. We haven't talked too much about it, even though you talked about it in our opening, Gara. Part of this is about physical wellness and emotional wellness, which means exercise, recreation. The well-rounded emergency medical technician and paramedic is somebody who gets out and does things, physical exercise, who is engaged in activities. So to the extent that we can get our communities to care, I shouldn't say care, they can deeply to act, to get our communities to act on behalf of the people that we're talking about today, we're really making a positive impact on the wellness of our public safety professionals, and hopefully that adds, that helps us with reducing suicidality.
Thank you, Steve.
I can add one of the things that you were talking about with family. Family is probably where we get the majority of our referrals for people that may be in need of something, whether it's merely just support or a call or a check-in. Like I said before, we could be sitting there with the table and here are my flyers and here's everything. And, I'll ask either the police officer or the veteran, how you doing? And it's 2 thumbs up, man, rocking and rolling, high speed, low drag. And, he'll walk past the table and then it'll be the wife, the brother, the uncle, the cousin. I'll say, I'll just take your card and I'll call you because they're having these issues. And not every issue that they call up is a crisis or, they're just looking for support and where's an answer for them. And as far as the community goes, we go to all of them. I go to faith-based, which is an extremely important part and parcel of this. One of the other things I remember in the study about veterans is their lack of faith, in a sense, and lack of something else beyond them, that it was just this typical black and white, what's life worth to me? And reaching out to the faith-based community, our synagogues, Catholic, Baptist. One of our Baptist ministers is a retired police officer from New York City. We work well with the local police departments, but again, that's me going to find them, and that's us going to find them and say, look, I'm not a fly-by-night, I'm not an idiot, this is what we're doing, this is what we're trying to do in the community, so that the police understand who we are, the hospital understands who we are, senior resource centers, it's an aging veteran population, and if people say, well, it's beyond that, I can tell you I had a suicide of an 80-year-old who was a Korean War veteran. And again, it was because of his time in the Korean War. So, we reach out any place that's a community center where we're going to have access to the community. Again, like the senior resource centers or, the veterans organizations, the VFWs, American Legions, DAV, things of that nature. It's sort of, why limit what we've got? I mean, that's the biggest problem for us, sometimes I think for peers, is I don't have the letters behind me. I'm not the LCSW. I'm not this, well, what do you know? And it's like, well, I don't really know that much, and every time somebody tells me I'm an expert, I find out how little I know. But I do know what it's like to be a veteran. I do know what it's like to be a police officer. And if I can help in any way, let me know. I'm not taking their job. This is not outside of my lane. I'm not in a silo. We're there to help. What can we do together? And the more the community knows who you are, the more people will reach out to you. And no matter where that community is, particularly the faith-based section.
Great point, John. Facebook is really, really important. What we're starting to see, unfortunately, with the state agency, it's hard to really identify one faith base that we can use at all times. But chaplaincy programs have been really huge. And with the chaplaincy programs, it gives us opportunity to have someone available in the event that a person basically does not want to talk to a police officer, doesn't want to talk to a clinician, but will go and lean on the faith that they've had since childhood. With us, when it comes to families, to answer the question for the most part, it's really difficult to get at a police officer's family because they keep them very well protected. And they try to keep them isolated from the things that they're dealing with on a day-to-day basis in their job. When we do flyers and we do pamphlets and we send them home, they never make them home. They never make it to the house. So in order to engage the families, what we've tried is we created like a Facebook account. We could create an Instagram account, but we had to take them down. But from a short period of time with the Facebook account, we were able to reach children. We was able to reach parents, which in many cases, when something happens, the parents are forgotten because you deal with your spouse, and the parent becomes the forgotten person in that particular situation. But one of the things we're looking to do, and again, this is just constantly thinking out of the box. We're trying to find funding for key change. And with the key change, we want to put them on every state police car or key set. So now what happens is when a police officer is going out there and he's on the road and he's actively involved, or he takes the keys home, he has our phone number or our message on those keychains. It's not an idea we created. We basically saw it in New York City. Phenomenal idea because all their cars had these keychains. The other thing that we're trying to do in order to engage communities and family is to create a sticker. Like each year, our PBA gives out, gives out stickers that basically say, 2020, 2021 trooper stickers. Well, we want to create EAP stickers that has a 1-800 number for EAP on it. So what happens is when that investigator brings the car home and he drives into the driveway and he's struggling, the wife or the spouse or the significant other or the child, teenager could look and go, oh, that's a phone number I could call for my dad or my mom to get him some assistance. Also identifying with tags for the uniform. Well, we have tags on the uniform to tell you how many years you have on. We want to make sure we get tags that say peer support. So now if a partner shows up at the house with his partner and he looks over or the spouse looks over and says, wow, he's EAP, I might need to give him a call about what my husband or significant other is going through. So I don't want anyone to think that we have all the answers in the Division of State Police, the EAP program, but all we're trying to do is think outside the box as best possible. And it is very key to get to the family. To let the family member is going to know first when their loved one is changing. Particularly when you have that police officer who's fresh out of the academy. When they went into the academy, they loved them, they was caring and they were funny. And then they start going home after a year and a half and no longer, they're cynical and everyone is bad and the community is different and they don't have those type of relationships anymore. So really key. And I will tell you, when you talk about death by suicide, and particularly with retirees or members that are isolated, it is really important for police officers to find lives outside of law enforcement. You need to have some type of engagement that gives you an opportunity to have an outlet that's not in the glass box of law enforcement. So you see the other side. So you engage with the other side. So when you transition from a life of law enforcement, I became a police officer at 21. I've been a police officer 33 years. That's like a lot of people. So I've been a police officer so long and I've been a civilian. And it's going to require some efforts to transition. But I spent time teaching at colleges, realizing that college students could be interested. I spent time doing a lot of community activities, whether it be for like seatbelt drives or just community activism, stuff in the sense of getting people to understand that, law enforcement is the way to go, recruitment. So I'm hoping it won't be too much of a shock. But when you think about the isolation, you think about people transitioning and going back to their families, they're losing one family. That's their law enforcement family. And that's really difficult to many police officers. So engaging with the family is huge. We'll do everything possible to make sure we find a way in. I think this year we're going to try to partner with our PBA and our investigators union They send out a mass mailing at the, end of the year for Christmas, in which they send out the stickers. They send out a newsletter. They send out a calendar. We want to see if we get our EAP pamphlet in and see if the family members will connect that way.
And along that line, Garrett, with what Elliot was saying, we feel that the family is important, and I think I mentioned it earlier. I'm not just a social director. I mean, we do the baseball games, it's family oriented. We do the movie days, it's family oriented. We do the picnics, it's family oriented. Not only does it get the family member to speak to other family members who are going through the same thing, but it also gets families and an entity to connect with other families, the husbands, the wives, whomever it may be. And it's in a non-judgmental, it's a social event. So they'll sit down and they'll relax. We don't do alcohol. There's no alcohol. So again, it's an opportunity for them to get together to share information. And we do it specifically aimed at family members. One of our best programs that we've had success with is an equestrian program called the Equus Effect. We've had 50 veterans go through it, a couple of first responders, about 5 or 6. Maybe 1 or 2 said that it wasn't really for them. The majority of them found it life-changing. And we're now going to be doing that so that it's the veteran or the first responder and a spouse or significant other. They're going to go through it together. So the aim is trying to get family members now to go through this whole process again. And again, together. And what Elliot said about trying to do that key fob thing, again, nobody wants to be that guy that comes over and picks up the pamphlet. But if you can get it into everybody's hand somehow, that will work. Nobody wants to go to that table in the back, hey, I'm the schizophrenic, let me get that. But if you give that flyer to everyone, everybody's got it. And the last thing is, along what Elliot and Stephen are saying, and I've said this for a long time, if we don't take care of our own, I don't know who is. I tell people, listen, you would never leave a comrade on the battlefield. Well, what makes you going to leave them now that you're home? So if you're a member of the VFW and you've got a list of 75 members, who is calling those 75 members just to check in on them? Hey, how you doing? You doing okay? And it's something that the unions could do. Yeah, I got 75 retired members in my union. Who's calling them up and just checking on them? You doing okay? You need something? How's food? Can you get out and get medicine? Can you do all these things? There was the study, and I think we spoke about it with Moto, Dr. Moto, and it had to do with suicide. And one of the things was just simply reaching out to someone. What a life changer that was. Not saying I'm here, you're broken, but it's just, hey, how you doing? You doing okay? Anything I can do to help? You need something? And you'd be amazed at how life-changing that could be. That's where you find the guy that's isolated. You doing okay? Well, and like Elliot, when they're being, hiding something from you. Yeah, I'm doing, hey, why don't I come over and have a cup of coffee? Well, but again.
Everything is okay.
Yeah, 2 thumbs up, rocking and rolling, high speed, low grade. But again, it's up to us to do it. We've got to be the ones that make that change.
John, you're so right. And, we haven't talked too much about social media today. And, in a way, social media is a tool for us that's, it's not new anymore, but, and it's constantly changing. And, perhaps all of us have to look to our children and grandchildren to keep us up to speed on what's actually happening. But the important thing about social media is you can spread a message very wide without a lot of cost today. That frankly drives a lot of what we see in politics, right? And so to the extent, Elliot talked about, putting a sticker in the car, or I think, John, you talked about putting the insert in the prescription bottle. We ought to all be thinking about how we can use the power of social media with friends, with families, with peers. One of the things I noticed when from Garrett is, Garrett, when you sent me an email, at the bottom of your email address is the National Suicide Prevention Hotline sticker. The next time you get an email from me, you'll see I've copied that, and now that's on mine. We can use social media in so many different ways, and we should that in itself could be an entire conversation for a webinar with some folks that are really social media savvy.
I just hired a social media guru to be able to do that, because one of the drawbacks we found is I may have Twitter. I have no understanding why Twitter exists. I really don't care. Or Instagram or Facebook. But you also have to be on top of it, because if somebody goes to my Facebook page and sees that I haven't posted something in 2 weeks, they're not coming back. But if I can keep on posting something that's relevant to, veterans, whether or not it has to do with the VA, this, that, I mean, even, things that you're entitled to, they'll come back and check the webpage. And that is so much beyond my pay grade. So we had to hire somebody to be able to do that. And I think that's going to be one of our better investments in the money that's our limited resource, because you do something on Facebook and you can hit 1,000 people easily, and that's how you get the word out. But it's got to be done by somebody more than me.
And you can try different things too. Quite interesting. We tried. We created a flyer, and it just basically had 2 boots: one dirty boot, one clean boot, and it was in the doorway of a residence. And the simple message was there was no rioters, no looters at home. Leave it at the door. And it really, the message was to tell the trooper, and then it had all the EAP phone numbers on the bottom, and it was basically to tell them, listen, you have to cut it off when you get to the door. Because those protesters are not in your house, you cannot treat your family that way. You have to treat your family different from what you're experiencing out in the streets. And what happens is, as John alluded to, is everyone says they're okay, no matter what happens when you reach out to speak to them. I'm okay. How was your day? I'm fine. Anything different? Yes. So social media is really crucial. In some cases, it's just little messages that go a long way. And people will call and reach out to you, like, Elliot, we saw your poster. That's phenomenal. Thank you. We have your information. And it extends way beyond doors that we traditionally cannot get into. And I will tell you, as far as training, one of my guys just texted me. He says, make sure you say that training is really key. And we want to constantly be trained. I have 4 people on my staff who are not mind becoming mental health providers. So we're trying to get to the Division of State Police, where we traditionally had masters in criminal justice from SUNY Albany, which was great. I went through the program, but they also have a social work program. So how about we transition 3 of the 6 that would go to social work? So now we have in-house counselors, or have a mental health, angle to it, which would be key, because now we become self-sustaining. The biggest thing we have is the fact that clinicians that deal with law enforcement officers and military. On my team, I have 4 individuals that spend time in the military. So we have a great mix. But now we basically, as peers, we assess and refer. And what's happened is a lot of the clinicians that we normally would use are booked up, and it's hard. So we're constantly looking for new clinicians that will deal with police officers' family, got diverse backgrounds and what they will help. Recently, I just ran into a situation where I need to find someone for an eating disorder, in which there's a concern that the person may or may not harm themselves. So these are little things that we don't think about that direction. But young adults, college students that are struggling to make it through college, whose parents that they're trying to live up to, that are police officers or first responders, they're struggling too in a big way. So telemedicine has been huge for us at this point, but when it comes to the families and getting into the household, we'll try anything, but it's really a difficult task.
Wow, this is just amazing conversation, and so many different ideas and strategies. And one of the things I just want to pause and reflect upon is each of you, and any of the questions that have been raised and in the responses and whatnot, is this sense of hope, of sort of a can do. Like, yeah, this is hard work, and it impacts people's lives and impacts communities. But at the end of the day, one of the biggest messages I'm taking away from all 3 of you is this sense of we can make an impact, we can make a difference. And, John, something you said made me think, never underestimate the impact that you can have simply by checking in with someone, right? And we say that so often. It doesn't have to be around suicide at all. Just never underestimate. It can be a game changer, literally, of saying, hey, how's it going? And I've got a friend and a colleague who, when he trains assist, he says, if I ask somebody, hey, how's your day going? And he gets anything other than fine, he stops and backs up and says, hey, tell me what's going on. He doesn't assume it's about suicide, but he just, because typically when you ask the question, how's your day going? You're already 5 steps down the hall when, because the answer you expect is fine, right? And so I think that's such a powerful message for everyone on the call. And that's not a policy. That's just something that we can each do, right? Is to sort of check in with each other and recognize that if we're present and we lean in, that can be truly life-altering in some instances. So we've got a couple of questions that have popped up on the Q&A. Before we get to that, I want to see for the three of you any just sort of closing thoughts, reflections on the discussion that we've had so far. Any sort of, reflections that have been unanswered or you didn't have a chance to talk to yet?
This has been an honor to just participate in this panel discussion. But for us and I would tell you any other agency, we can't do it alone. And without support of our colonel, and I've transitioned through 3 colonels now in ER. It's been amazing that the carryover, that EAP at this point, where the longest time it was a stigma, and we were kind of like, not necessarily EAP, but police officers didn't care. The colonel that sat in the seat in employee relations understood what our mission is and understood that we're going to be there to take care of it. So that's been huge. We also have an employee benefits section, ER, and Kirkley, Lieutenant Kirkley, his staff, Cara, and everybody else in that unit makes it easy. So when someone has a question when it comes to benefits, Terry Glass, so when it comes to benefits and they're basically worried about what benefit they can have, it's great to pick up the phone and say, I need this answer. Because in many cases, the struggle is the fact that they can't answer about insurance. And that will push a person to the limit also. And the fact that if you have a supportive executive staff, you have a supportive team behind that executive staff, and you have a unit of people that are caring, just like the gentleman on this call, John and Steve, that care about people, and you got a good unit and they're ready to go. If there's a critical incident for us, and it's just really important, you can't put anyone in your peer support team. You can't just say, oh, you know what, I want to put them somewhere, I'll put them as peer support. No, it has to be the right person. They have to be ready to go. Well, my team, I just can't give them enough honor. I send a text and say, we need to go to Buffalo, and they just basically say, when, and they go. And that's just a unique situation, to the point where I have to call some of them up and say, doesn't your kid have a game today? And no, you're not coming. You can come tomorrow. So they're committed to the mission. That's really key. The executive staff being committed to the mission. And you know what? You have to stay on for the buy-in. There are police officers struggling. There are police officers that are being pushed to isolation. And I have to imagine it's the same thing for first responders. And it's simple as this. You have a person who goes to work, but they don't agree with the football team that everybody in the station is talking about. So this team, this talks about the Giants nonstop, and you just don't like the Giants, or you don't have anything to offer to the Giants because you're a soccer player. So you come to work, you don't want to deal with this, so you go out on the road. You go out on the road for 12 hours isolated by yourself because there's no one you want to talk to because all they talk about are the Giants. And then what happens is you come back to the squad room after 12 hours, you sign out, you want this base, so you get there just enough time to sign out, and then you go home, and you're displaced from home because you're a trooper that's fairly new, and you're 2 hours from home, so now you go to an apartment with no one there, and you're further isolated. That also pushes a lot of people to a place where it's really dark, and if we don't stay connected with them, it could be really dangerous. And though I say giants, it's really politics. And right now in this current climate, we have a lot of police officers that are struggling dealing with the conversation because they're so heavy because they are, a one team fan. And that's fine, but it may push somebody else that you could miss to a dark place. So we need to make sure the supervisors are checking for those troopers that are really not engaging, those police officers that are really running out the door, and even the civilians that no longer want to come into the common area to deal with people.
Hi, Gary.
Powerful and important message. Yep, go ahead, sir.
Hi, Gary. You talked about hope, and I'll tell you that this conversation leaves me hopeful. I got to say that, John, Elliot, and you are part of that hope. I mean, every time I see a New York State trooper as I'm cruising up and down the Northway, I'm thinking about that, Elliot, that you're there for those guys. And John, every time I see somebody who served in our military, and I mean, your career, you talk about your career, all the different people and disciplines you're helping, that's incredible. But I do want to mention that we live in a time that's got some darkness to it. I mean, the COVID numbers are rising around the country. New York State seems to be a place where maybe we're able to control it in a different way, but we don't know for sure what's going to happen. All of us in some way in our professions are going to be on the front lines of that. And, we're going to see colleagues we're going to see people pass. We're going to see colleagues that get sick. We see people in our communities that don't have resources to pay rent and to eat. There may be some tough days ahead for New Yorkers and for people in our country. And I think we have to sort of factor that into this. We can't put this aside because of COVID. I think COVID makes this something we even have to push harder towards.
Absolutely.
And, you're mentioning the isolation. I mean, the majority of efforts of what we've tried to do with the Veterans Program and peer support is to get them out of isolation and reconnected. And COVID has pushed them right back into isolation. But again, now they no longer really have the people that they could reach out to. So we get calls not only just for people to talk to, but the hot water heater goes, or, they need a ramp for the elderly or something, and now they have a number and a place and a person that they can call for help. They're no longer isolated. They're no longer losing the opportunity of having somebody help them. So one of the things you had mentioned, it's one team. When I was overseas in the trauma center, one of the things that we had on our wall was one team, one fight. And, it was multinational forces West. So it was this whole thing of, we're all here for the same reason. One team, one fight. We shouldn't be fighting against each other. This is mine. This is one of the other things. But the last thing I would like to say is for any of the people that are mental health people out there, in a sense, is to sort of understand the culture. You have to understand the culture that you're dealing with before you can address them, whether or not it's the veteran community, whether or not it's the police community, EMT. You have to have a better understanding of who they are. I mean, I can tell you that if I'm walking along the street and you see somebody who's carrying 5 packages and all 5 packages are in his left hand and left arm and his right arm is free, I will tell you he's a cop because he's got his gun hand free. So, again, it's just little things of saying, the difference between a weapon or this or, the other things. It's just, I'm not saying that you have to do these things, just to understand it a little bit better so that you can relate to somebody. And then that will earn the trust, and that will allow them, for the other person, to give you access to them so that they can be honest with you, as opposed to you can go and see the therapist 5 times a day, and if you tell the therapist, I'm doing fine, it won't be until you trust him or her before they'll say, what's really happening is this. And it may not have anything to do with PTS. May not have anything. It could be dealing with a child, dealing with the finances. It could be anything else. But the only way they're going to open up to you is for them to trust you. And that goes back to that whole thing of it's trust. People have to trust you before they'll do anything. And if you can't earn their trust, find another profession.
Well said, John. Are the three of you open to taking a few questions that have popped up?
Sure.
Okay, so I'm going to start actually with one that's right in front of me right now. Any recommendations for people serving as community advocates? This person does a lot of voluntary work for disability and suicide prevention awareness, and they lost a sibling to suicide in the Army. So I think in general the question is, you know, what can community advocates do?
Find them support. The people that will understand what it's like to lose a family member to suicide are people who have lost family members to suicide. I can sit there and hold their hand and talk to them, and but only people that have gone through that truly understand it. And to find the resources so that you know that it's there. One of the things that I do as a county coroner, obviously, so I respond to suicides. But instead of just turning around and walking away, we've created a folder through the Suicide Prevention Task Force that has resources that are available to the survivors so that they have numbers and places and people that they can call. And usually right at the time of the suicide, all they're hearing is blah, 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 blah. They don't hear anything. And all they're doing is trying to cope. But we get them something like a folder that maybe in a week they'll look at and understand that they're not alone. So if your community doesn't have something like that, make it, create it.
Do any of you, a question came up, do any of you partner with local mobile crisis services, mobile crisis teams? And if so, what does that partnership look like? How does that sort of support these efforts around wellness and resilience and suicide prevention?
I can speak to that for a minute, Gara. Here in our county, we do work with mobile crisis, and the mobile crisis folks are, they come out in the streets and they get their hands dirty. COVID makes it harder, and to be honest, I don't have a lot of experience about what with them since COVID started, about how their practices have changed, but I'm sure that, it makes it a lot harder. But I think that mobile crisis is sort of, that kicks in when the problem's gotten pretty far down the continuum, right? That's when we're no longer trying to, this is when someone, when self-harm is potentially imminent. And I think as public safety professionals, all of our instincts kick in that circumstance about, how to save a life, how to bring about the immediate need. The bigger question is what happens, how we keep from getting there, one, and two, once we're there and once mobile crisis has done their thing, how do we make it work for the long term? And I think all of us has talked about the need for those long-term supports. We can get people through that emergency room visit where they're evaluated after mobile crisis takes them to be evaluated. We can get them through a couple of visits and discussions with someone. We really have to get into those underlying circumstances of how we're going to help them long term, because once mobile crisis is there, we're in acute phase of this. We have to take it from the acute phase and towards the healing process.
Thank you, Stephen. We definitely use mobile response. I think the difference for us is that my team is responding to that situation, but I think mobile responses, I've seen it in action before. And I will tell you, the simple answer is we use all resources available. When you talk about death by suicide, I would tell you, I have 8 coordinators, 7 of them are crisis negotiators. So we're prepared for a lot of situations, but we take all the help we can get. So we're not against using mobile response at all. Crisis.
In Putnam, they used to have a mobile response, the crisis unit. It's not there anymore. But we do deal with the local police departments in their emergency response units, which are basically the ones that are using for the hostage teams and so on. And, I explained to them, listen, this is not what I do. I'm here to support. You do the voodoo that you do your job. I'm not here to interfere in any way. If there's something I can do to assist, that's fine. And then if the individual is there and they're taken into custody, if they allow me to introduce myself, I do. And then I follow up with them in jail, or wherever it is that they've been sent, to understand, or so that they know that they're not alone. It's not just, the emergency has passed and now they're back on their own again. We go back and, we see them in jail and what do you need and how can we help and what can we do? So that's, again, a support system. Sure as police officers understand, I'm not here to interfere. I'm not here to alter what you are trained to do. But I'm here to assist in any way that you can, or that you think that I can help. So that's something that the police departments know and the emergency room knows. They know where they can call.
I had a question looping back to peer-to-peer work. And the question basically is, are there support or resources to develop one that doesn't currently exist, right? So is there some sort of clearinghouse, a starter kit, like if you wanted to do something and it wasn't specific, I don't think, to a discipline per se. So, is there a repository? Like if somebody wanted to start it, where would you begin?
I would
not reinvent the wheel. Right. I would not reinvent the wheel. Things are out there. You have to try and find them and see what, you can plug and play with what you're doing. But there are enough peer support programs out there, from, mothers of triplets to AA to, you name it. There are support systems out there, and pick and choose, but don't reinvent the wheel. See what's there, learn from them, and then work on. We're a 501c3 too, so you have to learn how to be a nonprofit. So that's one of the other things.
Something just popped up. Is there any EAP training for police officers? What we use is ICISF, International Critical Stress Foundation training. They do a really good training with Bonnie Frazier and a couple other members of that organization across the state. They do assisted individuals in crisis, group crisis intervention, and they do an advanced level on both. We found those will be very helpful as a baseline far as training, particularly for our peers. I do know that someone asked the question, is a training coming up in Watertown, but you look for the trainings in New York State. I would think if you put something together and you had a group of police officers or a group of first responders, that ICISF will send a trainer in to train you on those baselines. And at some point, you create your own team. And that's really important. If you're in the area where there's a void of peer-to-peer, create your own. And it's easy to do. You will find in law enforcement agencies, especially with small agencies in smaller areas, they don't have the ability to have full-time coordinators like we happen to have with the Division of State Police. We're fairly unique to most agencies, where my coordinators, all they do is assist people. But if you create your own team, ICSF is a good start. I'm sure OMH has some good training. DCGS with Scott Neff under the police wing, they have a lot of good training. They do a trauma training that's phenomenal. If you got another someone who's been through something really serious, there's a team called NILEAP, and they're New York State Law Enforcement EAP. They do a training that's phenomenal, in the sense of, if you experience something really bad, they invite like 30 people in, and they do a breakdown of what the person experienced and get them back on their feet. So there are resources definitely on the internet, like John said. Get out there, get on it, and if necessary, don't recreate the wheel. Just join on somebody else's team.
And just like ICSF, QPR has got a train the trainer component. You can become a trainer in your local community by taking the train the trainer, and then any individual agency or any individual person can take people through the QPR peer support program.
Thanks, Stephen. So we've got, I think, time for one more question. I think it's a really good question. Before I get to that, I just want to quickly summarize, if the three of you haven't had the chance, there are a number of very appreciative comments in the Q&A section for all of you. And there's a couple of other questions that we're not going to have time for, but just so the three of you know, People have found this to be extremely helpful and instructional. Somebody from NYPD said that they're using key fobs on the vehicles, have found it to be effective. Is it related to families? Somebody questioned, could you develop customized silicone wristbands for families with information? So I just wanted to put those out there as a couple ideas. A question that came up, and I want to end question briefly, is there or should there be efforts to engage family members to notify them of concern over their loved one, whether it be police officer or vet? And if so, how might you suggest this? So we've only got, well, a couple of minutes, so somebody wouldn't mind at least top of the ways.
100%. I think what a family member needs to realize, anyone in the profession in this field, they, like John said earlier, they have to be trusted. But for us and most agencies, that people that do this peer-to-peer support, it is confidential, strictly confidential. So if the spouse calls me, I'm not telling the spouse who call. And they could call confidentially and say, you know what, I don't want him or her to know. They won't know. Or it'll be, and the line that we've learned to use is this: well, who made that phone call on me? And I simply say, someone that loved you enough to make the call to get you assistance. And in most cases, there's no response for that. And then we just move on for whatever it is. In many cases, just maybe a conversation. In many cases, we have to be tactful about it, because if it's an isolated situation, they'll know right off the bat that it was a spouse. So we wait for a tactful moment when we're having a conversation, happen to walk into the station, say, hey, hi, how's everything? So it's different things that we do to try to get it in, but 100% absolutely confidential, and we encourage the spouses to call as many times as they like.
All right. We could probably go on for quite some time, but I imagine at the very least, some people might need to do a fluid level adjustment or something along those lines. So I can't thank you all enough for being part of the panel, and for the rest of the steering committee that, hopefully folks have been able to join in on this call, for your participation in the last few meetings. For folks who are on the call, next steps going forward, right? We anticipate, as I think I mentioned at the beginning, we will have other presentations of a similar nature. Some will be very specific on topics, best programs, best practices, et cetera. Some of the topics that the steering committee has mentioned being of importance is postvention, right? And it sort of has come up already. What do we do in the event that somebody does die by suicide? And what can public safety officials in different disciplines do to support each other and try to prevent further loss? So we have a wealth of different topics, and we're fortunate in New York State to have a wealth of content area experts to be able to talk on these things. So we will get this information out once we sort of refine those topics and dates and times. We will be recording those that are forward facing. And also you should note that once the workshop is closed today, there will be a pop-up survey. We ask everyone, please take a couple of minutes to fill it out. It's very brief. We greatly value your thoughts, your comments, and whatnot. And so with that, I want to be mindful of time. I would ask that each of you think about, what are you going to do for self-care this afternoon and this evening? What are you going to do that's restorative in nature? Thank you again so much for all that you do. Be safe, be well, and we will talk soon.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you, everybody.
A pleasure. Thank you. Take care, Garrett. Nicely done.
Thanks, John. You too.
It's been a privilege working with you guys on today's seminar.
Thanks, Steve.